David did such a wonderful job on our, I almost said vacation. What was I thinking? On our trip to the Philippines. He shared with us each day the daily devotions something of the story of Joseph. And one of those stories really struck home with me, especially as we were thinking this week on the TIPS presentation that came on Wednesday. And I want to share with you, if you will turn with me, to the 48th chapter of Genesis. Genesis 48. It is the story of Joseph. It is the story late in the story of Joseph. This isn't part of being sold into slavery and the famine and the skinny cows eating up the fat cows or anything like that. Well, I knew you were expecting that, so this comes a little later. And it comes in a very personal family time. I'm going to start in verse 9. And to set it up for you just for a little bit, Jacob, whose name had been changed to Israel, has come to the promise, or the land of Goshen in Egypt, and he has joined with his son Joseph that he thought he'd never see again after thinking he'd been torn apart by wild animals, been sold into slavery, gone into Potiphar's house, gone into prison, and finally been released out of prison and helped the nation of Egypt survive the famine. And now his life is coming close to the end. And so he calls Joseph and asks Joseph to bring his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And this is the story that happens in Genesis 48, verse 9 and following. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." That's Manasseh and Ephraim. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age. He could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him. And his father kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again. And now God has allowed me to see your children too." Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right, toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left, toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, even though he was younger, and crossed his arms. He put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, that they may increase greatly upon the earth." And when Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. And so he took his father's hand and moved it from Ephraim over to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this is the one who was firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, I know, my son. He too will become a people, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. And he blessed them that day and said, "In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And so he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I'm about to die, but God be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers, and to you as one who is over your brothers, I give you the ridge of land I took from the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. Now you say, what difference does that make? Good grief, that was a long time ago. And it was somebody else's family entirely. And I'm not sure how much difference it made anyway. It's just words, right? Well, it was about 1998, maybe 1999. Our families always got together for Christmas in special ways. I mean, Christmases were a blowout. Not that we spent all that much money, but boy, did we have a lot of fun. And my father handed me a gift. And I thought, ooh, this is going to be great. Dad and Mom always good gifts. And I opened the gift and I was surprised. Do you know what a gavel is? You know a thing the chairman might use to open and close a meeting or call for order if things get rowdy. Tap, 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 tap on the desk. He handed me a gavel. It was an ugly thing. He used it when he was the president of the Lions Club, and he would use it to open the meetings and do all kinds of things. The head of it was about that big around, made of walnut, one block. And while that walnut piece was a pretty nice little piece of wood, it had been beat up. It had been hammered on things it shouldn't have been. And because it was a solid block, it had actually gotten shrink cracks down through the middle of it. And you could kind of see it could very easily split if you knocked it too hard. And somewhere along the line, somebody had broken the handle out of it. And it was a very, very small connection where the handle fit into the head of the gavel. And the handle was about that long. Somebody had taken a piece of mahogany, just unfinished, turned mahogany, and had fit it tightly into that hole. But it didn't look very good. There was no finish on it. Down at the end of the handle, somebody must have dropped it on the end of the handle because part of it had split off, and there was kind of a splintery place to grab onto the handle with. And Dad just smiled this great big smile. And he said, "There you go, son. You are now in charge." In charge of what? He said, "Of the family. I give you the gavel that I use to lead many, many meetings as a symbol of being the leader of our family." Well, I didn't really smile, and I probably didn't say thank you, because I just thought he'd gotten off cheap doing Christmas presents one year. Cheap little beat-up gavel. I didn't understand what he was trying to do. I hadn't turned 60 yet. He was still working full-time, pastor at the Osprey Church, driving all over the territory, taking care of people in his different communities that he'd served, from Leadwood all the way through, down in Missouri, all the way through the country. Every time somebody called him and said, "My daddy is in the hospital," he'd take off and he'd run to where they were and have prayer with them and anoint them. Every time there was a funeral, it'd be his job to run wherever it was, no matter how many hours of driving it was going to be, to take care of them. What does that make me in charge of? I was working for a woodworking shop, and I didn't have a congregation to serve, and other than he and Mom, the family was spread out all over the territory. So I kind of discounted it. But it wasn't too long after that, I got a call. My mom called and she said, your dad's on the floor in the kitchen. He coughed, passed out, and we don't know what the story is. And I ran in the car, was over there before the EMTs got there. He'd started to come around. It was one of those things where he had taken a bite of breakfast. And it's not rare, but if there's a spot right in here, if you get something caught right at the right spot and cough hard, it'll actually cause your brain to just shut everything down and he just passed completely out. President Bush had a potato chip or something and passed out at the coffee table the same way, very similar. There's a nerve right there. And I leaned over as he was starting to come awake, and I smiled at him, began to talk to him a little bit as he lay on the floor. Something changed in those moments. And I got a better picture of what he was trying to do with that silly old gavel. He was trying to tell me, I'm not going to be here forever. And you better get practiced up. You better get your A game on and do a little workout a little bit, because the responsibility is going to eventually end up in your hands. See, Israel had already done the same thing for Joseph that he did for Manasseh and Ephraim. In this morning's scripture. Remember the story of how he gave Joseph this wonderful ornate coat? We talk about it being the coat of many colors, and we talk about it being the coat with the long sleeves. It was certainly an ornate, beautiful robe. And he had blessed his son Joseph in a special way that announced to everybody, I believe this boy is something special. And he reminded Joseph of Abraham and Isaac, Isaac his father and Abraham his grandfather. And he had to go back and remember, he was not that proud of the fact that he had put sheepskin on the back of his neck and down his arm to try and fool his own blind father into thinking he was Esau and receiving Esau's blessing in place of his older brother, stealing it right under Isaac's nose. See, we can bless people. We can give them our anointing. And then we can sit back and wonder how it's going to work out. Boy, that boy doesn't look like he's going to look out very much. I mean, he's on the run. He's now running for his life because his brother is angry and he's trying to get even, and he might even try and kill his brother to get his birthright back. And he's running to Laban's house to try and get away from an angry family member. How can God ever use a guy like that? How can God bless someone who is such a sneak, such a thief, such a selfish person? And yet, God does. He took that young man, Jacob, and he gave him a vision of a stairway that went all the way to heaven. And suddenly, instead of being a man all alone, thank you, Jan, I sure appreciate that. Instead of being a man all alone out in the desert, he's a man who is sitting for the night in God's own house, Bethel, the house of God. And slowly, his life changed from being a selfish, sneaky, underhanded, well, he still had some of that to do down at Laban's house. All right? There was still quite a bit of that to be done. But God doesn't stop working. I took the little mallet, the gavel, and I looked at it again, and I said, Dad, you turned this over to me in really poor condition. I took it down to the woodworking shop, and I refinished it all and took all of the scratches and the scuffs and the dents and everything out of the mallet and the head of it, and I reworked the end of the handle so that it was nice and round, and took out all of the splintery stuff that would have otherwise snagged in your hands, and I smoothed it all up, and I put a nice coat of very hard finish on it so that it would look nice, and I set it on an onyx knocker so that I had a special place I could tap it on if I ever got to a meeting. And I got it all finished up, and I put it on my shelf, and I just kind of let it sit there and forgot about it. And then one day Mom called and said, Dad's on the floor again, he's had a stroke. Would you come? 2010. And I went running over there, got to him before the EMTs got there. I knew it was serious. His whole left side was paralyzed. And then I realized, today's the day. Today's the day. I don't know whether he's ever going to survive. Thankfully he did. Thankfully he went on, and we had several more years. But I was in the leadership of the family. I did things I did not ever expect to do. I had responsibilities I never really thought would ever fall upon me to take care of. My dad had always handled his finances, has always taken care of his own bills, always managed everything beautifully. But you know, something happens when you have a stroke, and one side of the brain doesn't talk to the other side of the brain, and he couldn't take a handful of coins and tell you how many cents worth he had. So all of a sudden, all the bills came to me. And all the big decisions about what was going to happen came to me. I'm glad he gave me a little warning about that coming up. Because there were times that I wanted to say, I pass. I just don't want this. I don't want to have to tell my father, you can't have surgery and have your heart vessels repaired. I don't want to tell my father, there's no medical procedure that we can do to make your body repaired and whole again. I didn't want to have to tell my father that somebody else was going to have to take care of looking after my mother. It was no longer going to be his job, as it had been for 67 years. I'm bringing this to you because on Wednesday night, one of the things that happened in that report was inside one of those complicated charts that Darla put up on screen was it's time for one of the generations of our congregation. Listen carefully. Don't misunderstand me. Dad did not quit doing what he was given to do. He just gave me fair warning things were going to change. And on Wednesday night, the generations of this church were told, things are going to change. Get yourself prepared. Listen to what I'm trying to say. I don't know who the building committee was, that built this section of the building out here in front. We can go back in the records maybe and we can find out. But I have a feeling most of those folks aren't with us this morning. All right? They had a job to do. They had a burden they were put under. They felt very, very challenged to move out of that little tiny worship space down there under the annex and to put a building along the side of the road here in John Day that would be a testimony of what God could do to be an influence in this community. Now, we could probably find pretty quickly who was in the building committee when we added the extra section on and the addition and the kitchen and everything down there. Because that was, what, 95? Somewhere in that area? We know who those folks are. They're still probably in leadership roles. And they scratched their heads pretty good to figure out how they were going to add on to the building and leave more room. Have more flexibility to the building. But on Wednesday night, what she said, you need to start praying for the next building committee. You need to start praying for the next group of leaders who are going to feel the pressure to really accomplish something in the John Day community. And they're going to wonder how they're going to put this thing together. Whether it's going to be a building next door with an activity center, or whether it's going to be someplace where they can actually have an upwards basketball program after school, where they have rooms where they can tutor kids that are maybe low-income children that don't have any other parents at home to help them with their homework and guide them along. Maybe it's going to be a whole group of young mothers who say, I believe that we ought to take the Sunshine School and see it as a place, instead of just having 10 kids, we'd like to have 50. We'd like to have 4 different classes, each one meeting in a separate section in that new building, trying to find a way to keep the kids prepared and encouraged and moving forward, so when it came time for them to actually attend school, they'd be ahead of the curve and not behind. God is going to take a new generation and move this congregation forward. And there are going to be times when it seems a little bit uncomfortable. Do we know who those people are going to be? No. Do you know who they're going to be? No. Do we know who the teachers are going to be in Sunshine School next year? No. We know who's going to figure out what kind of a building we're going to need for the next phase of our church's history and how we're going to get it there. But somebody is going to have to pick up the reins, because it never stops. It moves from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And we need to give not only the gavel. Remember what my dad gave me? It had no significance, it had no importance, except it was real. And he said, now you're the leader of our family. But I'm not ready. Well, you got time to practice. I don't want it. You'll realize the importance of what you're doing. I don't really enjoy this. But you'll see the need. And it will eventually become clear. When Wednesday night, they talked about what the church feels best about. The report said that we as a congregation feel absolutely wonderful about our love for international missions and our passion to send people from our own congregation all around the world to change communities in all kinds of countries, in all different directions. Is there anything to be embarrassed about that? Absolutely not. But do you know what? we may have forgotten to tell our children, our grandchildren, how much we love this church. We may have just talked about what God wanted to do out there, and we forgot to talk about what God needs to do right here. Sometimes, instead of hearing the excitement and the passion about international missions, all they heard us talking about was, man, we sit month after month in the council, on the board, and we make all these plans and nothing ever happens. And it just seems like it takes forever to get anything done, and we move along at such a slow pace. It just seems like we make a plan and then we have to talk about it 6 different times before anything happens. And you know what our kids hear? I don't want to get involved in that. You know what our grandkids hear? There's a lot more exciting places to spend my evenings than down there at the church, wondering how long it's going to take for something important to happen. Maybe we've just neglected to tell about the fact that there's a reason this little church sits right next to the highway in John Day, Oregon. Because people of one generation after another, have invested their hearts, their minds, and their strength to make something important happen here. Now, Darla looked at that building as we have a string of properties across here, and she said at first glance, it looks like a very, very positive, welcoming place to come in and worship. But then you walk around the outside, and it begins to look a little tacky. Begins to look a little neglected. Begins to look like somebody's been cutting corners, investing their resources elsewhere. Do you love the ministry of Jesus Christ in John Day, Oregon? Think about it. Why don't you pray about it? Do you love it enough that you can say, I want somebody else to pick up the reins, get the vision of ministry of what is possible here, get a chance to see what these people are. There are 1,000 people outside of this front door, 1,000 people within 4 miles of this church that do not know anything at all about Jesus Christ. But you know one of the things that's most important in their hearts? From the survey that were done in this community, they want any group that has a passion about God's spiritual reality in the world. And they want to be involved in a congregation that feels wonderfully excited about what God's Spirit is doing. They are not looking for an activity center. They want a relationship with Jesus Christ and His Spirit. Are you ready for that?
Amen. Absolutely.
Are you ready to pray for someone to catch the vision for what we might be able to do? To whisper, we have the answer over here. We have the Christ that you're looking for over here. Come and see. Come and experience what we've felt. Come and feel the joy of the Lord. Come and be involved with us. And see how God can change your heart. See how God can change your community. If you heard me say that I'm scolding you, if you heard me say I was upset, please go back and listen to my words again. I want you to understand what my dad did to me, I want to do for you. Here's the gavel. God's mission in the world. The gavel that says, I have given you all authority so that anything you ask in my name, all you have to do is ask, and I will give it to you.
That's right. Thank you, Lord.
Do you want it badly enough to pray for our children who may not really want to attend here right now? Who may feel better going someplace else to church? Are you ready to pray that God will move in the hearts and the minds and the spirits of people that we love so that they have a chance to come in and receive the gavel,
Amen.
the responsibility, the vision, the job to do, the passion for what it means?
Yes.
Are you willing to say, I've done my part, and now I'll pray and support you to come in and be the next generation to move the church forward?
Praise God. Amen.
There's nothing here but love, because you cannot make the transition between my father's generation and my generation if you don't genuinely love them.
That's right.
My dad handed me that stupid old gavel, and I discounted the meaning of it. I thought it was a meaningless symbol. But it became a precious treasure. It sits on my shelf at home in an honored place right at the front of the shelf. Not because I want to keep it for myself, because I have a problem, you see. I'm not getting any younger than you. And I have to say, it's coming close to the time when I have to give that gavel to the next generation of Douglases.
That's right.
And I have to pray about that. And I have to ask God how to proceed with that in a way that is precious and not casual or unthinking. It's thoughtfully, prayerfully done. And so we want to be careful as we move forward. The ministry of Jesus Christ, the responsibility for moving this church forward, whatever the future might hold, is too precious for us to hang on to too long.
That's right.
Israel could not hold the blessing. It had to be shared. It had to be shared when Abram had to give it to Isaac. It had to be shared when Isaac gave it to Jacob instead of Esau. And it has to be passed down through each successive generation. And it has to be done willingly, it has to be done lovingly, and it has to be done in time. Not too late. Don't hold on too long. We have a lot of things to think about with a sermon like this. It's not a sermon where you go, oh wow, yeah, that makes sense, okay. It should hit down deep sort of in the pit of your stomach and kind of make your stomach cramp up a little bit. But God's working.
That's right.
And He's moving in the hearts of many, many people throughout our community. They want it to work. They want God to have an impact here that's real. They want to see it happen. They want to be witnesses of what's taking place here. They want to share the testimony of what God is able to do in normal, everyday people and see the help come, see the salvation come, see the answers come. They're asking us, do you want it enough to be a part of helping us see it happen too?